In a couple of minutes, Mr. Hoppy was back on the balcony with a sheet of paper in his hand. "I'm going to lower it to you on a bit of string," he said, "or it might blow away. Here it comes." Mrs. Silver caught the paper and held it up in front of her. This is what she read. "Essio trot, teg regib, emok no essio trot, warg poo, fup poo, toos poo, nerps poo, wolb poo, lose poo, egrog, elzug, futs plug, tup no taff, essio trot, tup no taff, tegno, elbog doof." "What does it mean?" she asked. "Is it another language?" "It's tortoise language," Mr. Hoppy said. "Tortoises are very backward creatures. Therefore, they can only understand words that are written backwards. It's obvious, isn't it?" "I suppose so," Mrs. Silver said, bewildered. "Essio trot is simply tortoise spelled backwards," Mr. Hoppy said. "Look at it." "So it is," Mrs. Silver said. "The other words are spelled backwards too," Mr. Hoppy said. "If you turn them around into human language, they simply say, 'Tortoise, tortoise, get bigger, bigger. Come on, tortoise. Grow up, puff up, shoot up, spring up, blow up, swell up. Gorge, guzzle, stuff, gulp. Put on fat, tortoise, put on fat. Get on, gobble food.'" Mrs. Silver examined the magic words on the paper more closely. "I guess you're right," she said. "How clever! But there's an awful lot of poos in it. Are they something special?" "Poo is a very strong word in any language," Mr. Hoppy said, "especially with tortoises. Now, what you have to do, Mrs. Silver, is hold Alfie up to your face and whisper these words to him 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. Let me hear you practice them." Very slowly and stumbling a little over the strange words, Mrs. Silver read the whole message out loud in tortoise language. "Not bad," Mr. Hoppy said, "but try to get a little more expression into it when you say it to Alfie. If you do it properly, I'll bet you anything you like that in a few months' time he'll be twice as big as he is now." "I'll try it," Mrs. Silver said. "I'll try anything. Of course I will, but I can't believe it will work." "You wait and see," Mr. Hoppy said, smiling at her. Back in his flat, Mr. Hoppy was simply quivering all over with excitement. "Your slave for life," he kept repeating to himself. "What bliss!" But there was a lot of work to be done before that happened. The only furniture in Mr. Hoppy's small living room was a table and 2 chairs. These he moved into his bedroom. Then he went out and bought a thick sheet of canvas and spread it over the entire living room floor to protect his carpet. Next, he got out the telephone book and wrote down the addresses of every pet shop in the city. There were 14 of them altogether. It took him 2 days to visit each pet shop and choose his tortoises. He wanted a great many, at least 100, perhaps more, and he had to choose them very carefully. To you and to me, there is not much difference between one tortoise and another. They differ only in their size and in the color of their shells. Alfie had a darkest shell, so Mr. Hoppy chose only the darker shelled tortoises for his great collection. Size, of course, was everything. Mr. Hoppy chose all sorts of different sizes, some weighing only slightly more than Alfie's 13 ounces, others a great deal more. But he didn't want any that weighed less. "Feed them cabbage leaves," the pet shop owners told him. "That's all they need. And a bowl of water." When he had finished, Mr. Hoppy, in his enthusiasm, had bought no less than 140 tortoises, and he carried them home in baskets, 10 or 15 at a time. He had to make a lot of trips, and he was quite exhausted at the end of it all, but it was worth it. Boy, was it worth it. And what an amazing sight his living room was when they were all in there together. The floor was swarming with tortoises of different sizes, some walking slowly about and exploring, some munching cabbage leaves, others drinking water from a big shallow dish. They made just the faintest rustling sound as they moved over the canvas sheet, but that was all. Mr. Hoppy had to pick his way carefully on his toes between this moving sea of brown shells whenever he walked across the room. But enough of that. He must get on with his job. Before he retired, Mr. Hoppy had been a mechanic at a bus garage. And now he went back to his old place of work and asked his mates if he might use his old bench for an hour or two. What he had to do now was to make something that would reach down from his own balcony to Mrs. Silver's balcony and pick up a tortoise. This was not difficult for a mechanic like Mr. Hoppy. First, he made 2 metal claws or fingers, and these he attached to the end of a long metal tube. He ran 2 stiff wires down inside the tube and connected them to the metal claws in such a way that when you pulled the wires, the claws closed, and when you pushed them, the claws opened. The wires were joined to a handle at the other end of the tube. It was all very simple. Mr. Hoppy was ready to begin.